I'm Hutcheson with Seed Consultants, and we're here today north of Frankfort, Indiana to look at some different fields, different planting dates and different field conditions. A lot of this area has had to deal with severe rain and heavy rains over the last several weeks, and we've got some replant and some drowned out areas of fields. We'll start today in this field, which is not indicative of the overall condition of the crop in this area, but it was planted about April 15th, mid-April, and it's pretty far along. As you can see, looking out across this field, it's a twin row cornfield, 34 plants per acre population, and it looks to be about the V7 to V8 stage of growth. So as far as ear development and early plant development is going on, no disease issues or pest pressure to speak of yet. Overall, looks like a very good stand and very uniform. But like I said, this is not indicative of the overall conditions of the crop in this area. A mile south of this cornfield are a couple more cornfields where one has been replanted multiple times, and we're going to go take a look at that. That way we can compare those replanted fields to this field that survived the heavy rains because of its earlier planting date. So on our way south to look at another couple fields, we stopped at a cornfield where we found some damage, some herbicide damage from a growth regulator. And we thought this would be a good example to point out. These corn plants here, you can see wrapped leaves at the top where the new leaves are forming, and then clubby roots where the roots look like they're fused together sort of at the bottom of the plant. And this is a result of a plant growth regulator that was applied post to this corn. It's an example of some of the damage and stress that can be caused to the plant. When you look at this damage long term, the more severe the damage, the more dramatic the impact on yield. One concern would be that this stage of the plant growth between the V6 and V8 stage is when the ear size is being determined, so there may be some effect on ear size, number of rows, kernel rows, and the roots are obviously affected, so uptake of nutrients or standability could be a concern as well. If the damage is not severe and it's not affecting all the plants can kind of grow out of it and the yield damage might not be noticed, but the more severe incidences can cause a reduction in yield. We're here about a mile south of the first few fields we looked at to see a side-by-side comparison of a replanted field and a field that was able to survive the heavy rains and adverse weather earlier in the season. The field in the background was planted in late April and has done very well. Just parts of the end rows and some small areas of the field had to be replanted. But the field in the foreground here was replanted twice this season due to the heavy rains and the adverse weather. And like many areas we've looked at, anything planted in that end of April from the 25th, 26th, 27th, right before or during that change in weather when we had some cold weather move in and heavy rains, those fields were really affected. Fields that were planted a week or two before or even several days before the 25th survived and have done much better. So it's been kind of a common theme, the different areas we visited, that those last few days of April, starting the 25th, we had some variable emergence, some adverse soil conditions, some very saturated soils where we had both corn and soybean fields that had to be replanted, and in some cases those fields were replanted and then had to be replanted a second time due to more rainy weather. Obviously, with the fields we've looked at today, you'll see a very large variability between planting dates and growth stages, and this is representative of fields all across the state. One concern that may lead to is some differences in plant development throughout the year. Although the later planted corn can mature faster, it can reduce its required growing degree units by as much as 200. There still will be some variation in development in terms of pollination and maturity at the end of the year. And although the later planted corn will mature, it may be slightly or much more wetter at harvest and require drying, whereas the earlier corn may be much drier and may not require near as much drying in the fall. We're here taking a look at a bean field, twin row beans, and a lot of Both corn and soybean fields in this area had to be replanted. This one did not. This one has a very good stand, a few lighter areas, but not enough to warrant replanting any of it. Pretty clean for the most part. There is some grass starting to come and a few broadleaf weeds here and there. But overall, very good looking field with a uniform stand. We'll go ahead and dig up a plant, take a look at the root system. With all the wet weather that we've had, heavy rains and field work this spring, I wouldn't be surprised to find compaction in some fields, but this field doesn't appear to have any, at least in the areas we've scouted. Soil seems to be in very good condition. You can see the root system is forming well. Plants forming the nitrogen fixing nodules, and very good growth above ground as well. When you look at this plant, you've got a good healthy root system, got very good growth above the soil. You also see this plant is starting to bloom. So although we've had some tough weather and some replant in this area, this field is off to a very good start and still has the potential to raise outstanding yields. This time of year we get several questions about things that are going on in the field or what things we need to be looking for. So a lot of this corn is in the early stages of growth. Some of it's up to the V6 to V8 stage. One important thing to keep in mind is that in that time period, ear development is going on, determining the size of the ear. So any kind of stress could possibly lead to a reduction in kernels on the ear. So it's important to make sure that we're getting our side dressing done, our nitrogen on before the V8 stage. Other questions we've been having recently are with some of the issues we see in the cornfields. Some plants have been purple early on in the vegetative stage. That's usually a result from cool nights and sunny days, and the plants usually grow out of that. If the purpling stays around longer, it could be a more serious issue like herbicide damage or compaction of the soil. And another issue we've seen, which you can see when you look out across your field and see scattered yellow leaves, is called rapid growth syndrome, and that's also usually a result of the weather conditions. Where the plant goes from a period of slow growth and cooler weather to warmer weather, and the growth speeds up. There can be some wrapping of the whorl and trapped leaves, and then when those leaves finally pop out at the top of the plant, the new growth can look yellow. This usually has no effect on yield, and after a few weeks of warm weather, you can't even tell that the plant was affected. Another thing to be paying attention to this time of year is damage from certain insects. You can walk your fields and look for root lodging. That could be a sign of damage from corn rootworm, and you also want to look for damage from the corn borer. This wraps up our June field visit here just north of Frankfort, Indiana, and we'll be back out in the fields for more scouting in July.